Guardians of the Galaxy is now available on the PlayStation 5, 4, Xbox, and PC ports, and is a game that I was actually quite excited to play. I really like these characters. I think they're some of the best that Marvel has to offer in any medium, and so I was very curious to see what they would do in game form. This game was distributed by Square Enix, but developed by Eidos Montreal, and in this you essentially follow the Guardians in a wacky, really zany adventure across the galaxy as they're trying to stop an impending doom from taking place because of this new threat that has arrived that could decimate everything, and essentially the hopes and dreams of a million beings in the galaxy have come down to 5 felons. The Guardians have become quite a household name in the last few years thanks to the James Gunn directed movies that have come out in the MCU, and it's also been leading to a surge in comics popularity. And then of course there was the Telltale game a few years ago. Unfortunately that studio shut down, and well, it's just a shame really. Telltale was good, man. But I'm gonna cut to the chase right here. Guardians of the Galaxy is not only a fun game, it's a damn good game. It's one of my favorite games of the year, in fact. This is an excellent superhero game, and it's one that really it captures the essence of these characters so well and tells a really great story with some really great gameplay to go along with it. Essentially, you only play as Star-Lord in this entire game, which I remember at first was a little skeptical to hear. I thought, hey, you have the entire Guardians of the Galaxy at display, but you can only play as one of them. To the game's credit, it finds some more unique ways to make all the other characters, well, feel like you're playing them at the same time as well. There's some really great call to action stuff that the game implements in terms of the action sequences, like when you have to blast stuff and you need someone else to come in. The maneuvers that eventually you develop with these characters, they're pretty damn great, and you can do a lot with them. And they also help essentially develop personal relationships with them, like in terms of dialogues or in terms of conversations with characters. If you bring up certain things, you really develop a pretty awesome rapport with them. Like there's a moment where Rocket and Peter are not quite on good terms, and then there's a moment where Rocket has to sort of be put on the chopping block. Peter sort of steps in and says, no, it's actually this, and Rocket gets basically saved in that scenario. And there actually is a text that says Rocket is very grateful that you did that. And so while you're doing all of these things, as well as this stuff in the action sequences, you build up enough of a rapport with them, all of them. I also like that it handles it in a very Mass Effect kind of way, especially the first Mass Effect. Like if you played the first Mass Effect game, which I'm assuming most people have because that game series is pretty popular, the stuff that you do in that game as Shepard, while you're also trying to build connections with the other characters, is pretty great because essentially you create enough of a narrative and you create enough of a thread that you start to connect with them in more ways than one, to the point that they're like a family to you. They're not just a crew that you're taking along who are employed on the ship to do certain jobs. And that's kind of what you create with the Guardians in this game, and I really like the fact that it was handled as well as it was. Couple that with a really great narrative that is very unexpected and goes to places that I didn't expect, and you have yourselves a pretty damn good game. The gameplay itself is pretty awesome. It gets a little repetitive at times. I'll talk more about that part later. But I was pretty amazed by how smooth it was. It was a very fun experience. It didn't really bother me at any point in time. There were no major issues in terms of the gameplay per se. The adaptive trigger stuff is really good in this, and it's much more subtle than some other games that I've played recently where they very aggressively use the vibrations. Yeah, there's some moments here where you do get some of that, especially when the guns that Peter has, they overheat sometimes. So when you're pulling on the triggers and it's obviously they're, recharging, then the controller kind of goes and it's like that's also a little, whatever, but that kind of makes sense. It sort of puts you into that immersive feeling. But I really liked how the game was able to accomplish some of those adaptive moments too. My favorite is this one part where they're walking and there's thunder happening, and you can feel the rumbling of the thunder through the controller. It is genuinely remarkable what this technology is doing for these games nowadays. It is quite impressive, and I am, for one, really, really impressed with how the game utilizes it as well. And I think that is in itself a positive. Regarding the repetition thing that I mentioned earlier, it is at times. Like, after a while, I knew exactly how an encounter was gonna go, for example. Like, if some bad guys showed up after a while, I said, okay, here's how it's gonna go. We're gonna see a plot of land, with some obstacles here and there. You blow them up, I assume, and then there'll be some spots here where you can have a character throw something, or you can have a bomb explode in the case of Rocket or something like that, or Gamora can jump from here and slash something down, or Groot can lift something up using his arms and create some kind of a spiky, mass. Like, basically, you kind of knew what it was going to be after a while, and after that, it became very much like a button smashing thing, so you kind of knew what to do in those levels. Also, one of the issues that I had with this is a lot of dialogue repetition. The same lines kept getting repeated on a loop over and over again, and depending on how long you were in an encounter, you would hear those lines maybe 4 or 5 or 6 times even. Like, I think in the last encounter that you have in this game with one of the villains, you can genuinely, I think Peter said the words, "This is not hitting him or affecting him in any way at all." I think about 6 to 7 times in the exact same way. There are little things like that could have been improved upon. Aside from that, I think the game itself, the whole way, does provide a pretty smooth experience. I would say maybe a couple of moments I thought the frame rate dropped. There's a couple of points where characters are walking through fire, and I thought, well, okay, you can kind of see that that's not quite in the same 60 FPS scenario, and it's also like slowing down the movements here in a little bit. So yeah, there were some little moments like that, which I think that could have been sort of streamlined a little bit more. They probably will with updates that'll come out for the game as I'm assuming the months go by, so that should hopefully take care of those things. One of the things I also really liked about the gameplay was the huddle feature. Sometimes when you're in the middle of battle, it'll recharge and you'll basically have the entire team come over and give them a rousing speech in the middle of the fight to kind of get them going. And it kind of makes you invincible for like a few seconds as a song starts playing in the background. Speaking of songs, great soundtrack. There's some really great song choices in here. There's a point in this game towards the ending which is synced to the final countdown by Europe, which I thought was amazing. There's a point of time where you'll hear Take On Me playing during an action scene or even a dramatic scene. And I think those things really helped cement the feel and vibes of the Guardians extremely well. But also, I want to talk more about those little team moments in the middle of fights that really help make them as good as they are. And when I say Mass Effect, I even mean in the dialogues. Like, you obviously choose something that Shepard will say in those games that will, affect the rest of the conversation going forward. Similarly, you'll have those things over here too. And sometimes if something doesn't go a certain way, some character will notice that and be like, hey, remember that time that didn't quite happen? And it may have worked out in some other point of the game if you'd done it just right. But since it didn't work out in that specific moment, you're essentially caught because of that. Those pertain essentially to some of the QuickTime events, those things about what you can do differently, and I should tell you right now, it takes a second, because the first time it happened, I was like, wait, what am I supposed to move? And then you'd end up pressing the wrong button or moving like one of the joysticks incorrectly, and eventually you would have to repeat the certain scenario again. It's happened a few times at the beginning when you're trying to save someone from falling down, which I thought was a little crazy, but then you sort of get the hang of it as it goes on, and then you eventually know how to take out each enemy in the best ways possible. Essentially, all your issues in terms of combat or in terms of QuickTime events mainly pertain to the first act of the game. As it progresses, however, those issues are gone, they're put to rest, and at the end of it, you have a pretty great game. And all of those aren't flaws. Like I said, my flaws are only the little things, like sometimes it gets a little repetitive and stuff like that. Beyond that, I had a really great time with Guardians. I don't want to go too much into spoilers, and I actually haven't, decidedly so. I could talk a little bit about what's going on in this game in terms of a narrative, what's going on with the characters, the villains that they have to fight, characters who may or may not show up in it. I'm not going to say more about it, but I don't want to, and I think this is the kind of game you should go into as blind as possible and knowing as little about as possible. There's a lot of surprises hidden in here that are going to very much excite a lot of players who are playing it. If you're a Marvel fan, you'll notice about 10,000 things that'll make you very, very happy. There's one thing in particular that'll make you very interested in what could happen going forward if they make a sequel to this game, which I'm sure they will. And there are some little nuggets like that that really help make this framework of the game as good as it is and even enhance it more so. The fan servicey things in this, they make sense. And thankfully, it's a joy to play throughout, and it's just such a fun time. and I genuinely cannot recommend it enough. Whatever port that you're playing it on, definitely get this game. Just enjoy the visual experience. I mean, you'll get some great shots. You have a really great photo mode in this as well. Some really good stuff you can do with the characters in terms of poses and in terms of them looking at the camera. It's actually a lot smoother than a lot of other photo modes that I can think of off the top of my head. So that's definitely a major positive. It has some really great character moments, some really emotional beats to it. There's one scene in particular that puts, I think, even the movies to shame, which is saying something. In fact, you could rival this storyline with the movies in some cases, where this one's a stronger story. No disrespect to the movies, I think they're very fun, but there are some things that they do with the characters here that I absolutely loved. And I can't wait to get back into the world of the Guardians again. I know this game has a new Game Plus option that appears at the very end of it. This is one of my favorite superhero games now. I've genuinely had a great time, and, well, yeah, I can't wait to go back, like I said. I'm gonna give Guardians of the Galaxy a 9 out of 10. Guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoy playing the game, or if you have played the game, what are your thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy? Let your thoughts in the comments below and let me know. As always, if you like this, guys, please do subscribe, and happy gaming.